Start the recording. All right. So again, what we had started with here was building out the lib and spec directories for the bike ride application. We're building out the testing specs to follow from the little examples here we have in each one of these iterations. So this is going to be a bike spec. Let's change some of the content here. We have bike. And if we look at like some of the information we need, it looks like this is really the bit of information we need if we're going to create this instance. So let me go ahead and click here, everything from ride 1 all the way to the end of this line. And I'm going to replace everything I see here with that, because we're going to be creating an instance over here. Now I can format these. This is probably how I do it, just so we can see things more clearly. And so now that we've gone ahead here, we've created this instance of ride. Let's go back over. We should be able to access the name, right? We should be able to access distance, terrain, and all that. So this is all going to be an initialize, right? So let's reference at, in this case, it looks like they have it named, ride 1. So let's say at ride 1. So we expect at ride 1 to be an instance of, in this case, of the bike class. That's our first expectation. The next one, we expect at ride 1 dot name to be equal to, say here, or let's just say to be and we'll take that same value here, Walnut Creek Trail. All right, so we've also got at 1 ride dot distance. So let's say at 1 ride dot distance to be 10.7. We're expecting at 1 ride dot terrain to be, in this case, to be hills. Yes, we expect terrain to be equal to hills in this case. And let's go to the next one, which is going to be dot loop. Now, what we can see though is kind of like last time, this one indicates to us that question mark that it's more of like an instance method. So I'm going to create a separate test for that one. I'm going to say that we're describing, in this case, loop. And again, in this case, it should tell us, let's see, can indicate if the ride is a loop or not. All right. All right, so let's see here. So dot loop, in this case, at board dot loop. And passing in this case, nothing, right? This is just a regular invocation that we do here. And I'm going to give this parentheses to invoke the method. But we'll see if that's necessary or not. The next one we need is, let's go ahead and say total distance. And we've got another ride over here, so I'm going to go ahead and create the second instance from this as well. So we'll say at ride 1, and I'll say at ride 2. And I'll go ahead each line here, one by one. All right. So total distance in this case should be 21.4. So it can report its total distance. So it can report its total distance. And then in this case, we expect, let's get rid of all these other cases. In this case, we also expect that total distance, in this case, at bride. Let's change this one to at bride. Dot loop to be equal to true. Expect at bride. At bride, let's see, total distance. Okay, so in this case, at bride dot total distance should be equal to 21.4. And then we've got our second instance. We do the ride to.
Hey, Luis,
Mhm.
can you commit frequently?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay. Did you see the messages I sent you?
Sure. Okay. All right, I see. Yep, I
Yeah,
see your
can you,
message.
yeah,
Mhm.
can we text by the phone?
Yep,
Okay,
sounds good.
okay, I'm gonna go back on mute.
Okay. See, so we got git status. All right, so we don't have a Git repository for this. Let's initialize here. And let's say here git add. Let's call this, let's give this a name for this project. I'll say bike ride application. So I'm going to go ahead and add that README. Or we could actually say in this case, just an initial commit for all of these. But that's fine. I can do git commit -n, add README. Then we want to say git add spec. And git status, there we go. Git commit m, add bike spec. Status, all right. All right, so let's take a look back at bike spec here. So again, they expect total distance to be equal to 21.4. Now ride to loop. Let's say here, this should be actually at ride one. Then I'm going to say here expect at ride two dot loop. And let's say here to be equal to true. And then we expect at ride two total distance is equal to 14.9. All right, so let's get rid of all of our other extraneous tests from before. Let's get rid of the excess end here. And there we go. So we've got the makings of our testing spec here. We've got both of our instances. We've got, let me move that down. We've got all of our attributes being passed in. And we have some expectations here of the initialized method. We expect @ride1 to be an instance of bike. We expect @ride1.name to be Walnut Creek Trail. @ride1.distance 10.7, @ride1.terrain to be hills. Then @ride1.loop question mark. We expect that to be let's see here. We expect this one individually to be false. The next one @ride2, we expect this to be equal to true. And then total distance can report its total distance @ride1 total distance to be equal to 21.4, and @ride2 dot total distance to be equal to 14.9. So this testing spec is definitely looking better to me. So what I would say here is git add dot git commit m, and I would say here finalize bike spec. Now let's get all this here. We've got these to begin with here. I'll go ahead over to GitHub and we can create a repository for this project. give this a public name. So I'll say bike ride. So let's check where we're at here. I'm going to say we've already done git init. We've done all these few of these steps already. Let's do git branch -m main. Now let's do git remote add origin. Now let's go to git push u origin main. And we should see these changes pushed up for us here. And let's clear this out. And let's do, in this case, Ruby spec. Now, I want the spec directory to follow the same sort of structure as the other spec directories that we have here, in which we always have, in this case, a spec helper. So I'm going to grab this, go over to spec, create a new one, spec_helper.rb. And I'm going to require in the files that I'm using here. So let's say require bike_spec.rb. So I'm going to say Ruby, and then the spec directory, excuse me, let's say rspec, and then the spec directory. All right, so let's see over here. Bike spec helper. Let me make sure that this is bikespec.rb. So we are pointing to, yep. Okay, so it looks like we need to require the model files though. So let me just double check the spec helper over here as well. Yep, we are requiring the models. So let me change this to spec. Yep. All right. So let's see, .spec. In this case, let me just double check again the spec helper. So we have .lib, and let me go over here to the spec helper. We have .lib in this case, which should be referring to bike.rb, which we don't have here. So let me do bike.rb. And now it actually has a model file to reference here for us. All right. Now, if we do a git status here, let's add the spec helper here. Add spec helper. And let's do git status one more time, lib, git add lib. And what I could say here is git commit m, add bike model. Now we've got git status here. Let's clear this. And git push origin main. Let's just see that everything is pushing up well here. All right, so we got a few commits over here. So let's go back over to bike, and I can again over here I can take some inspiration from another model we've been working on, maybe something a little more simple, so that I have a good starting point here. That's okay. Yeah, this will be fine for us. So let's paste this one in. Let's change this to say, right, this is our bike model now. Now, going back over to the test here, we can see that with the initializer for the bike class, we are taking in a few different values. So we've got name. We've also got distance. We've also got loop. And finally, we have here terrain. Now we've got attribute accessors for name, distance, terrain. And that looks like these are all values that we pull out. Now we've got at name is equal to name, at distance is equal to distance, loop is equal to loop, terrain is equal to terrain. So we have ways of capturing all these different values that come in. We've also got loop. Now, all right, can indicate if the ride is a loop or not. So in this case, we're just going to double check, right, whether or not at loop is true or false. So we really should just be able to return here directly at loop. Now the other method is total underscore distance. And that should just report back, right, the distance for each one of these. So let me get these in order. We've got name, distance, loop, and terrain, name, distance, loop, and terrain. We've got loop, where we're returning the loop. We got total distance. Get rid of this. And total distance really should just return. Let's see. Total distance is double the base distance if the ride is not a loop. So what I'll say here is if, and I'll say self. And let's see. If I should be able to say actually in this case, if at loop, so if that is true, then let's actually say here, if not at loop, meaning if that is not true, then what we want to do is return, in this case, at distance times 2, else return. Let's actually say this. I can also probably just do if end, so that we can keep it all same. But if it is that, otherwise we're going to return distance. I could also change my logic to say if this is true, we're just going to return at distance. Otherwise, we're going to return at distance times 2. All right, so let's run our test here. Okay, let me run this manually. RSpec. All right. So let's go back up here and follow the errors here. All right, so let's see, uninitialized constant ride. Let's refer back to bike spec. Okay, so I can see ride in this case. Okay, so this is not bike, this is going to be ride actually. So let me change this to ride. Let's change the name of this file to ride. Let's change the name of this one as well to ride spec. Oops, no. Let's change the name of this one to ride spec. And I'm also going to say here, this links to ride. Now back in the ride spec, I expect this to be an instance of ride. All right. So let's see here, uninitialized constant ride. So let's see where this error is coming in. Let me clear this out so I can be sure of which errors I'm looking at. All right. So let's see over here, uninitialized constant ride, even though in this case we have gone ahead and connected the ride model here. But inside the model, the issue is probably here. So I'm going to give this model the name of ride. And let's run these. And what I'm going to say over here is, we'll update, we'll commit the changes once we get these working. So wrong number of arguments given 1 expected 4. Okay. So I can see here now that they're passing in a whole object with all these values. So this is actually really just going to be one entire object here that I could go ahead. There's a few ways I could handle this. I should be able to, let's see if I can use this approach here. Okay, just judging by the syntax, I can see not. So let's change the name here to init object. I'll just call it that, the object that's passed here to initialize. So in this case, it's going to be init object dot name. Then we're going to have init object dot distance. Then we're going to have init object dot loop. Then we're going to have init object dot terrain. So lots of information here. We also have attribute accessors set up for all of these. So let's refresh this and run it one more time. Now let me clear this out so I can be sure of what the test results are this time. Undefined method name. Okay. So going back over to the ride spec, I can see that we're trying to go ahead and pull the name directly from @ride1. Now, the way in which we've set up this model over here, we have attribute accessors for name, distance, loop, and terrain. But let's see, let's get a binding pry in here and start to work with things this way. So I'll go over into the ride. Let's bring back in the binding pry. And hit enter here. Here's our binding pry. So let's try just creating a new one of these rides first. Okay. All right, so undefined method name in this case for, let's say, name Walnut Creek distance, loop falls, terrain hills. Now, we can see that I'm calling name on this one. At name, at distance, at loop, and at terrain, we should be able to go ahead and access each one of these. But I can see the way that I'm accessing the values from the object is probably the issue here. So let's say init object, instead of name, let's say, I'm going to reference it as a key here, or excuse me, as a symbol. I'm going to reference the key using a symbol. Let's try referencing it in this way. All right, clear out of this one, or exit rather. Let's clear out of this. Let's get rid of the binding pry to see if this takes us all the way through. All right. So expect at ride1.name to be equal to Walnut Creek Trail. They expected the string of Walnut Creek Trail, and they got the string of Walnut Creek Trail. But let's see, it looks like maybe just the spec itself. Expect at ride1.name to be equal to Walnut Creek Trail. Okay. Now let's see how, oh, okay. So I believe in this case, it's supposed to say to equal. So let's change it to equal, to equal, to equal, to equal. Now let's clear this up and run it one more time. There we go. So all our testing specs are passing here. And let's do git status. Now I'll say git add dot, git commit m, finalize. What I'm going to say here then, changes for iteration 1. Let's get all tests. So now let's do git push origin main. We'll have our latest changes pushed up here. So we've finished the first iteration now. Let's move on to the second iteration. So we'll go back over to here now. Iteration 2, now we've got bikers. So let's move on to what I'll do here is we can get rid of the spec, or actually to the spec helper, I'm just going to add one more line before we've even created the file. I'm going to say lib, and then I'm going to say bike.rb. Now I'm going to take some of this from here into the file that I create. So I'm going to say lib, and then here I'm going to say bike.rb. Now let's paste this in. I'll say class of bike. And let's take a look at some of the instances we need here, right? Like the first one is biker here. Let me click over here. And let's go over to we can create our bike spec as well. Now let's take the ride spec. Let's duplicate it here. Now I'm going to also drop in this biker instance that we've got here. And let's replace all this here. All right, now our initialize method, I'm gonna get rid of these other methods we have. We'll come back to adding these. Or I'll just keep them commented out for now. But looking at initialize, we know that we should be able to access name, right? We can see that 2 arguments are being passed here. So that that clues me into how the model should be structured. We do have a good starting point here, so let me just maybe remove this. Well, I'll just stay here. Let's check our changes so far. And let's say git add dot, and I will say git commit m create bike model plus testing spec. Here we go. Now, looking back over here, we should be able to access all of these values. So let's go over to the bike spec, the bike model we just created. We know that we're going to want name. We know that we're going to want max distance here. And it looks like max distance is going to be the second one. So let's say here that we've got name and max distance. So I want to make these readable. So let's say max underscore distance here. And at name is equal to name at max distance is equal to max distance here. All right. So we've got name and max distance. The rides in this case. So let's read through some of these requirements. Create a biker with attributes and a way to read that data. A biker has a list of acceptable terrain and can learn the new terrain. Let's see, can keep track of all its previous rides. Okay. So acceptable terrain and let's see, rides, it looks like in this case, are created just off the bat with this. So what I'm going to say is at rides is initially equal to an empty object. And I'm also going to say that at acceptable terrain is equal to an empty array here. But again, let me start with the testing specs. So let's say at biker to be an instance of the bike, or I guess in this case it would be biker. So let me change this to describe biker. Let's change this to biker. Let's change this to biker. And let's change the name of the file as well to biker. And I'm also going to change the name of this to be biker spec. There we go. All right, let's run, in this case, our spec and then the spec directory. Okay. So I'm going to do git status here, and I'm going to state here git add dot, git commit m, rename. It's going to be biker model plus testing spec. Got that cleared out. All right. So now we know that rides acceptable terrain. We're going to want to test for these over here. So we would expect that biker is going to be an instance of biker. We would expect that biker dot name is equal to Kenny. We would also expect that the max distance is equal to, in this case, it should be equal to 30. We expect the rides at ride1.rides to equal, in this case, an empty object. We also expect at ride1 dot acceptable terrain to equal an empty array. So these are all what we would expect right after, right, initialization. So name max distance, rides, and acceptable terrain. Now, the first method I can see here is learn terrain. So let's take this other described loop here. And we can actually just, first of all, get the initialization to work here. Let's just get those tests to pass first. So I'll go ahead here and I'll run an rspec on that spec directory. All right, so seeing them to fail over here, that's fine for us. Let's go over to the biker spec here, max distance. Let's start building these out. We know that we've got, again, name, max distance, rides, and acceptable terrain. Let's just stick with that piece for now. And we can see here, undefined method max distance, in this case for no class. So if it's stating no class, then we've got to make sure that, here we go, biker.new. This model is also called biker. Now let's see the biker spec. Again, we are referring to biker. The spec helper, I've got biker.rb, which is updated. Now, if it's stating no class for this one, let me clear this out. Let's run it one more time. Let's go to the top here. And if it's failing out on max distance, then let me go here. Just got to update these. So I'm going to control click. Let's update each one of these to state biker. So let's clear this one out. Let's go ahead and hit enter here. All right. So now we want to make rides and also acceptable terrain accessible here. So let's say rides and let's say acceptable terrain. All right. Let's just verify here. There we go. We got those tests to pass. So git status here. I'll say git add dot. Add biker initialize method plus testing specs. And I'll stay here passing testing specs. Now let's push up these changes. And let's check how many commits we got at this point. We got, okay, we're good on the commits. So let's go back over here. All right. Now the next method for us to test out is going to be, as we can see on the right here, learn terrain. So I'm going to change this one to learn terrain. So learn terrain in this case, let's see, has a list of acceptable terrain and can learn new terrain. Okay, so I'm going to state here then, it has a list of acceptable terrain and can learn the new terrain. So let's change this and move it into here. So I'm going to say here, we expect, first of all, that acceptable terrain is equal to, in this case, initially an empty, it has a list, right? That's the first thing we're checking. The next thing that we're doing is adding new terrain. So let's say at biker, and I'm going to say here at biker dot learn terrain. And I'm going to put into here gravel. And I'm going to say here, if we go ahead and add this in, right? Let's, we're not expecting anything for this. We're going to go ahead and do that first. And then we're going to say at biker dot learn terrain. And I'm going to say hills. All right. Just one moment here. All right. So we've gone ahead here, we've done gravel, we've done hills. Now at this point, biker.acceptable terrain, we should expect both of those to be added, right, to that array. So we'll say gravel, and we'll say hills here. Now, there's a few other instances that are created here. Let me go ahead and exit out of here so we can see more. All right. Now, acceptable terrain, let's minimize this actually. Just a little bit over to the left if we can, a little more. All right. So first of all, we'd expect gravel and hills to be inside of that array. Now we also want, let's create ride one. I'm going to grab all this content here. And let's do here, at. And I'm going to space these out so we can see a little better. So we got name distance loop. We've also got terrain of hills. All right, let's create another instance here of the ride. So this is going to be our at ride 2. And we got name, we've got distance, we've got loop, and we've also got terrain of gravel here. So at that point, we've created those two. Now, the acceptable terrain, let's get this one, learn terrain and acceptable terrain to work for us here. So going back into here, let's go ahead and run our spec. All right, so let's see over here, has a list of acceptable terrain and can learn new terrain. So let's build out what we need in the biker class to make this work. First of all, we know that we can return acceptable terrain, right? We know in the first case that's going to work. But let's create the instance method here, learn terrain with an exclamation mark. And we can go ahead here and just state that there's going to be some sort of terrain that's passed in. And we've got to say acceptable terrain. We're going to push in the terrain that we passed into this, into that instance variable before going ahead and returning the new acceptable terrain instance variable with those terrain, with that new terrain added. Or actually in this case, okay, it doesn't look like it returns anything, so that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the return value here. Because really all it should do is add it to that list each time we invoke it. So there we go. Our test is passing here. Let's say git status. I'm going to say git add dot git commit m, and I'll say here add learn terrain instance method plus passing tests. Push up our changes here and see where we're at with commits. And I'll just keep the page pointed here so we can see. All right, so we got 10 commits coming through. Good. All right, let's go back over here. Now let's move on to the next part here, right, which is going to be log ride. So a biker can log a ride with a time. The biker can keep track of all its previous rides and times for those rides. So going back over to the biker, we're going to create another instance method, or excuse me, another testing spec here for this new method, which in this case is going to be log ride. So log ride, as we can see over here, a bikers can log a ride with a time, and it can keep track, right, of all of those. So let's see here, a biker can log a ride with a time. All right, so it can log a ride with a time. So after we go ahead and invoke log ride a number of times with rides and also times, then we should be able to, let's see, let me go back here, can keep track of all its previous rides and times for those rides. Okay. probably say and. Let's say here, and can keep track of all of its previous rides and times for those rides. So let's invoke this method here. And let's say at biker.log ride. And we can pretty much just copy paste these over one by one. So I'll grab this, paste it in. Let's grab the next one. Oops. Let's just grab this little piece right here. Let's drop this one in. Now we got this next piece. Now we got this next piece. All right. So we can log a ride with a time and can keep track, right? So I'm going to state here now, expect, in this case, at biker.rides to be equal to, dot to equal. And we know that it should look like what we see here. Although let's see how we can test it. They might give it, they also won't log a ride if the ride's total distance is greater. So these are more conditions, right? But can log a ride at the time, but can keep track of its previous rides and times for those rides. Okay. So I would expect in this case, dot rides, we could check it in different ways. I could say, okay, dot length, right? Maybe to be equal to 4. So let's go ahead and try that one out. So this is not gonna pass for us first, of course, but just want to see where we're at. All right. Can log a ride with its time, right? So in this case, undefined local variable or method ride 1. Now I've got a reference here at ride 1, at ride 1, at ride 2, at ride 2 to make sure I'm passing in those instances. Let's do rspec spec. Okay, undefined method log ride in this case, so we got to build out that method. Now I'm going to go back over to biker. Let's say def log ride. And log ride, it looks like, should accept 2 things. It should accept the ride, and it should also accept, let's see here, and time. So there's a ride, and there's also a time. And what it should do in this case is it should continue to add rides. Let's see here. So we've got, okay, biker.rides. And what it really does is it looks like it packages it up. Let's see, biker.rides in this case is an object. So what we should add here, we should be adding a new key value sort of relationship here. So what I'll say is at rides, and we're going to push in a new object. But what I could say is at rides, and then I could say ride is equal to, and we could say an array here that consists of right here and right here. Okay. So then in this case, what we should have is the time here, but it should continue to add in. So we want to have, first of all, at rides ride, and then we want it to be equal to, it looks like these are not the terrains, but just the speeds themselves. So if we've gone ahead here and we've done biker log ride, and then we do biker.rides, we're going to see that ride 2, because ride 2 is associated, let's see, distance 4.9, loop is false on this one. So what we're doing again is we're passing in the ride and we're also passing in the time. And what we end up with, again, is an association of the ride with an array that consists of values for that ride. So let me see, because we're always going to have to have to add time to this one. But let's see. I could do it this way. Let's see here. We could check it with a binding pry as well. So let me try this. Now, let's clear this out. Let's run this testing spec. We should hit the, let me see here. Rides dot length to be equal to 4. So let's see here. Okay, expected 4.1. Right. So in this case, according to my biker model over here, let's bring back the binding.pry. And now let's go ahead here and let's create, we could go ahead and create a ride, but we've got to create a biker as well. So let me go back over here. Let's create a new biker instance. Oops. Let's grab this guy. Now we've got our new biker. And let's check all these other values here. Let's say biker.name. There we go. Biker.max distance. There we go, 30. Biker.rides. There we go, empty array. Biker.acceptable terrain. Empty object, empty array. Now let's do biker.learn terrain. Gravel. Now let's do something else with hills. So now both of those are added. Now biker.acceptable terrain, we've got those. Now let's create some new rides here. I'll grab this first one. And then let's go over here and grab another ride. All right. Now biker.log ride, in this case, we're passing in the ride and we're also passing in the time associated with that individual ride. And then we've got another ride in this case, it looks like we're passing in the same ride, but we're giving it different time. So what we should see then is the ride itself. Inside of the object, we've got the ride itself that is associated with the time. So let's go ahead and try that first one. 92.5. Now let's try biker.rides and see how that's formatted and coming out. So we've got the ride, and that is associated with, in this case, this number. But if I go ahead and replace it with 91.1, and I hit enter again, all that it's doing here is just replacing it. But it really should be adding it continually to an array here for us. So at ride, and I could say, we're going to push in that time. So let's reload. Yeah, if we can't reload, that's okay. Let me clear. Let's run our testing spec here, but I'm going to comment out the binding pry. And let's see. Okay, so in this case, at rides, ride is nil class in this case. But really what it should be equal to, let me set it equal to an array. And then what I'm going to say is at rides ride, and then I'm going to push in that new time. Okay, so let's see over here. Biker dot, oh, okay, so this case, it should be rides in this case, should be this object itself. But let's do a binding pry here. And let's see if I can return this back actually. Or I should be able to just go ahead and puts at rides ride. Now let's see if I can get this. Okay, so it's going through here and it's putting the, in this case, the ride itself that's coming through. But again, we're setting it equal to, trying to set it equal to an array here before pushing in that time. But okay, I think I have an idea in this case. let's say in this case, ride is going to be not equal to the time itself, but it's going to be more like we're going to find that ride. And I should be able to say where, and I'll state here at rides dot ride, and let me see here, is equal to the ride. I could also say this: if at rides ride is equal to the ride in question, we're going to go ahead and push that in. So just a moment here. I'm going to just double check something on my end. Let's see here. Let's see how I can best express this. So again, it's finding inside of the object that ride. And so in this case, if at rides ride is equal to that ride, then what we want is to push in that ride. Right? So what I'll say here is at rides ride. So I'll say this is equal to an empty array. Then what I'm going to say here is push in that time. Let's try this. Okay, so there's a little syntax error. Let me see here. If this condition is true, then we want to go ahead here. Now let me end out this method. Okay. So we expected 4, got 1 in this case, but let me see here. It shouldn't necessarily be a length of 4 in this case. Looks like the testing spec itself I'm going to have to modify. So we would expect at biker.rides in this case to equal, there should really just be, let me go back over to biker here. Let's bring back the binding pry. And let's see over here now. So I'm going to create that biker one more time. And we've already checked all these. Let's learn terrain. We've got acceptable terrain. Let's create our 2 new rides. Should actually just be able to go back through our history here. Ride 1. Ride 2. Now, let's try biker.logride. So we're just going to try with that. Now let's try biker.rides. Okay, so we've got ride, and in this case, just an empty array. Now, what we want to do is we also want to find where that ride is equal, right? Where in this case, at rides.ride is equal to ride. Now, let's remove this conditional. And I want to check this out one more time. Reload. See if I can do, let me clear this one out. Clear this out, actually remove the binding pry here. run this one more time here. All right. So, all right, this is fine for us. We've got ride 61.6. Now, expect biker rides to be equal to 4. Instead, we got 61.6. Now, let's see if I can find here. Biker rides. Let me try this. Puts at biker.rides. Let's see what we can actually get from that. Okay. So in this case, at biker.rides, we're getting just that last number that's coming in here. So let's go back over here and let's modify this. So we want to find the key inside of the object. Let's see here. See, our two arguments again here are going to be and let's see again what's happening here. It looks like this is the ride itself is 14.9. But it looks like the value that's being passed in here again is the time, right? The time it takes to do this. So the time that's passed in here needs to be associated with an array. Let's see here. Okay, so let me see again. So we've got okay, so again, we've got our, in this case, our rides hash in this case. So we could use a special operator here. And this is going to be the or equals operator. So basically, what we're stating here is if it doesn't exist already, we want to create it, and then we want to go ahead and push in that time. Now, let me state here as well. Let's take a look at what we've got. All right, we've got those two times, it looks like, 60.9 and 61.6, which is good. Now, we also want the second one here, which is 92.5 and 91.1. Okay, good. Now, let's output here over in the testing spec, puts biker.rides, and we've got those instances themselves represented, which is good. Followed by, there's our, there we go, piece right here, and then the times that they're associated with. So what I should say in this case is expect biker.rides. And in this case, we want to be able to say, okay, let's look inside of rides and let's find at ride 1. And we would expect this to equal this array right here for ride 1. Now, let's clear this out. Let's run it one more time. There we go. That works for us. And that's a good way to test for it. And we would expect as well at biker rides for ride 2 to be equal to this array. So let's run this one more time and everything should pass here for us. All right. Now let's do our git status. Let's do git add dot. And we're going to say here in this case, we're going to add log ride. let's see here. Git commit m. Add log ride instance method plus passing tests. Let's go ahead and push these up. And going back over here, we should see that we've got now 11 commits. Good. All right, now our final condition here for iteration 2. A biker can report its, okay, well, let's see. A biker will not log a ride if the ride's terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. So we can add that condition as well. Let's see. Oh, and there's a personal record section here. So let's actually add that here. Now, what I can also do is before I move on to that, I can add another section here and I can say it will not log a ride if the ride's terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. So let me put here. Will not log a ride if the terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. Now, this is the next section here. So we've got acceptable terrains listed here. Now, again, it will not log a ride if the terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. They also won't log a ride if the ride's total distance is greater than the biker's max distance. Okay. So basically what this means is we got to check those additional conditions there. So let's save that for now, though. Let me just quickly build out the other method here. I'm going to say describe personal record do. And I'm going to say here it can report let's say here it can report its personal record for a specific ride. This is the lowest time recorded for a ride. This method will return false if the biker hasn't completed the ride. Okay. So in this case, the personal record, first of all, let's state here that we want to, first of all, say at biker dot personal record, and we'll pass in at ride 1. And then we'll say at biker dot personal record at ride 2. Now we would expect these to equal these values. To equal and this value. Let's try running this because I think what might be the issue here is we have different, let's see. All right. All right, undefined method personal record. That's okay. Let's go ahead over to biker. And let's say personal record. Personal record should, in this case, accept a ride that we pass in. And personal record is going to, again, in this case, return, let's see, the personal record for a specific ride. So what we want to do then is we want to look through the records that we have here. So we want to say at records ride. So what we want to say then in this case is we want to find the time that is the highest here, right? So what we want to do then, and let's see how they're returning it as well. They're returning them as just individual numbers here. So we want to return inside at records.ride the highest number inside of that array. Just a moment here. Okay, so we should be able to go ahead and return the max here inside of there. So let's go ahead here and let's do RSpec. All right. Now let's see over here, can report its personal record for a specific ride. And it looks like in this case, undefined method, empty array for nil class. Now let's change this to expect biker.personal record to equal that value there. Now, let me see here. Biker line 25. Okay. All right. So the issue here, the reason why we're getting that nil class is because I'm running this kind of outside, right? Outside of what happened over here. So if we have an issue here of this not really giving us what it is that we need here, then let's see. Personal record. Biker. Line 25. It looks like it's breaking right here. So what I can say is if at records ride, okay, so let's see. Now it's giving us this issue in line 25. So let me state here. All right. So let's clear this out. Now, what I want to make sure of is whether or not we need all this other information here. So let me grab this. Let's run this one more time. Okay. So let's see here. So we've logged those rides before we go ahead and do personal record. But let's see. Let's run this once more. Okay, so the problem here again is returning at records and then ride dot max. Now, personal record, if we pass in that ride, it's going to find that ride inside of not records. Let's change this to at rides. We're going to find that ride and we're going to return the max. So, okay, so in this case, undefined method max for no class. Now, let me say this. If at rides ride, then we want to go ahead and do that. Now let's see, expected 91.1 got no. All right, so we got no because in this case, there's no rides associated here with this one. Let's bring this back over. Let's bring this into both situations here. Okay, so there we go. So we're making progress, 91.1, but got 92.5. Now, we would expect the personal record, right, for ride one to be 91.1, but again, we got 92.5 in this case. The reason being, because we don't have in this case, this is the lowest time record reported for a ride. This method will return false if the biker hasn't completed the ride. Okay, so if they haven't completed the ride, let's go back over here and just return false. Now, let's see here as well. This is lowest time. Now, okay, so the issue here, the reason why we're seeing those numbers is because these additional conditions I've still got to build out here for the spec. It will not log a ride if the terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. So let's say that as well. Now, biker 2, we're going to want a second biker. So let me go ahead up here and create biker 2. Who's Athena. Okay. Now we log these rides. All right. But biker doesn't know this terrain yet. So the terrain also has to be included inside of log ride. So let me see. Let's go back over to biker. And log ride, we've got to have a conditional around all of this. If, and we'll say here, we could say at acceptable terrain. And let me double check if it's acceptable terrain. Yep. If acceptable terrain dot include, let me check here one sec. Okay, so in this case, it should say if it includes, in this case, ride dot terrain, the terrain that's associated with that ride that we're passing in, then we'll go ahead and add that time. But if not, we'll just go ahead and exit out. Let's see. They also won't give a ride if the ride's total distance is greater than the biker's max distance. Okay. So what I can also say here is they also won't log a ride. So there's two conditions that need to be true here. The acceptable terrain needs to be included, right? Or the terrain of the ride needs to be included in the list of acceptable terrains. And we also need ride's total distance is greater than the biker's max distance. So we'll say ride dot total distance is greater than the biker's max distance. So in this case, it would be greater than at max distance. So again, two conditions. Let's run this again. Okay. So making some progress here. Let's see. Expect biker.rides ride 1 to equal 92.5 and 91.1. But in this case, we got nil. So let's see. If acceptable terrain does include, and ride.total distance is greater than, oh, and if it is not greater than, in this case, it would actually be a flip, right? So if the ride total distance is less than the max distance, so let's take a look back over here now. So again, both conditions have to be accepted here. So acceptable terrain does need to include the ride.terrain, and the ride.total distance is less than the max distance for the biker. And let's say here, if the ride's total distance is greater, so in this case, and if the ride's total distance is less than the max distance, then we'll go ahead and add these. So let's see. Let's think about the flow here. At biker.rides at ride 1, where the test is failing here, it looks like biker spec line 45. So in this case, we've gone ahead and can log a ride by the time and keep track of all the previous rides and times for those rides. 45, now it's getting nil, but let's see. At biker.rides, and then at ride 1. So at ride 1 in this case is a terrain of hills. And we can see that for the biker, right, okay, so there's a few other pieces of information that I need here. I need to learn this terrain as well. Let's move this in. Okay, we got one failure now. And that is the personal record section here. So again, we're going through all these steps here. I may need to go ahead here and add these distances here, or add these terrains here. There we go. And now biker 2 is going to have to learn some things here. But let's check personal record here. Let's try running this one more time. Okay, so 91.1, 92.5 is actually what we got here in this case. But ride 1, let's see, biker in this case. Personal record, let's go back over to here and check personal record. If at rides and ride, then we're going to go ahead and return at rides and ride of max inside of that array. Now let's go back over to here. Again, we've learned the terrains. We've logged those rides. We've got acceptable terrain. We've got rides, max distance. Now, personal record, we know in this case, it should be returning back to us 91.1. But again, in this case, it's returning 92.5. But ride 1 for 92.5 is not coming through for us because, let's see, ride 1. The terrain is hills. Now, biker personal record for ride 1 should be 92.5, but I guess in this case, let's see, it's 91 point, let's see. They will not log a ride if the ride's terrain does not match their acceptable terrain. But we did add the acceptable terrain here with hills. So unless they modified, hills is included. And I can see the terrain of hills is included here. And the biker.rides is listed here as 92.5 and 91.1. But when they say biker personal record for ride 1, they're getting the smaller number for some reason, which is not the max inside of that array. And the personal record in ride 2, it's saying 60.9. But now we did log those rides. A biker can report his personal record. This is the lowest time. Okay. Oh, okay. So in this case, it should actually be the min, not the max. We should be returning the minimum number if we're trying to return the fastest time. So there we go. Now, let me check all of our other specs here before we commit these changes. We've got our personal record. Now let's add a few more conditions here. So we've got biker 2 that we created. Now, let's also say over here, can report a specific record. Okay. This method will return false if the biker, so I can just keep adding it here. That's okay. Let's do in this case. Actually, in this case, since this is all biker 2, that should be fine. Let's go ahead here and say it will return false. It will return false if the biker has not completed the ride. So let's add in these additional conditionals here. Let's say biker 2, we've already gone ahead here. So let's add this at biker 2 at ride 1. Now let's say at biker 2 logged ride, and I'll say at ride 2, and we'll say 67.0. All right, now let's change this. So we would expect here in this case, expect at biker2.rides to equal an empty object here. And I'll say here 2 equal here. Okay, there we go. That passes for us. Let's also go ahead here and say biker 2 learn terrain, gravel, biker 2 learn terrain hills, and biker 2 log ride. Let's make this at biker 2 at ride 1. Then we're going to have at biker 2 dot log underscore ride. And I'm going to pass in ride 2 and 65.0. Now I should say, okay, expect at biker2 dot rides. And let's see how we check this before. We expect it to be equal to, and we would expect that rides with that ride in there. In this case, let's say at ride 1. 2 equal, and in this case, 65.0. This array was 65.0. Okay. Now, undefined local variable or method biker2. Let me change this to be at biker2 and at biker2. Let's clear this out. Okay, so in this case, got nil. In this case, at rides ride 1. T equals 65.0. But if we're looking for rides inside of that, let me see how okay, so I did at biker 2 dot rides at ride 1 to equal, in this case, it should be equal to 65.0 because we've added the gravel and the hills. So initially we try, we don't have those terrains included. Now we try to go ahead again to add those. And we would expect, let's see, ride 1 in this case is going to be a terrain of hills, and the next one's going to be a terrain of gravel. So really both of them, let's say ride 1 95.0 and can't bike this distance. Okay. So the distance for ride 1, the distance for ride 1 in this case, let's see that distance. Distance is 10.7. And the max distance for biker 2 is 15. So if it exceeds it doesn't actually exceed the max distance, but okay, so again, in this case, right, so it's less than that. Let's go back over to the biker, and ride total distance is less than the max distance, which is true in this case. The ride total distance, it looks like for ride 2, the total distance is, let's see, the distance here is 14.9, but the total distance, again, in this case, if at loop return at distance, okay, at distance times 2, and ride 1 is a loop of true, okay, ride 2 is a loop of true, so it's actually 30 is the max distance. But let's make sure that the total distance, let's see, back over here, double the base distance if the ride is not a loop. Okay, so the ride is a loop, so in this case, it's going to be pretty long, and that is longer than the max distance. So what I should say then over here in biker spec is I should say if max distance, let's go back over here, at max distance is equal to max distance, but it's actually, let's see, max distance, ride total distance is less than that, then we want to go ahead and log that time. All right. Just a heads up here, by the way, Sid, we are right about at time. We're pretty much done with iteration 2. We'll just need a little bit more time for this. I am going to have to wrap up though, because I do have another session with a student.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you go ahead and just submit it?
Yep.
Submit and send?
Totally. Yeah, we could submit these changes, and iteration 2 is almost done here. So let's add here. Hit commit M, add, let's say additional biker instance methods plus tests. All right, so that is all pushed up, and we've got like, if we refresh this, we've got now 12 commits to reflect all our work together today. Okay.
Awesome. I'll shoot you a text. We have our first, the group project is being kicked off today. I'll shoot you a text.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I'll
All right,
wait for a
man.
message from you. Okay, Sid?
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything. Send me a Venmo request how much I owe you.
Okay, yep, I'll send you a request for today. Okay, on Venmo.
Okay. You have a great day, buddy.
All right, you too, Sid. Thank you. Bye.